Okay, Krista just made me the host. Does that help?
Nope.
How about now?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Okay. So I will go back and show you. You missed that slide. That was so important. And then this is a slide that we're talking about now. All right. So a diversity audit's a critical step in building a truly representative collection because no matter how well we think we're doing at this, there's always some kinds of unconscious biases that can and sometimes do get on our way. And so the best tool to make sure that we are all on point is to have concrete data that gives us information that we need to really build a representative collection. So that's why that's the whole reason we're doing our diversity audit to see where we are and where we need to go. So the scope of this project, because this is really a huge project that we're taking on here, um, we chose to start our committee work by really researching collection diversity audits. And this was new to all of us. So we started by looking at what other library systems had done, whether they were big systems or small systems or single systems. We put a lot of time into researching them and considering what kind of statistical information we use for our community, where would we get that information from, because there are multiple sources for census data and they all come with a variety of information available. And we went back and forth, should we just use school district data since we're part of USD 500? But then that would leave out Piper and Turner. And then we also serve other parts of Wyandotte County. So we decided to use the Gale database, and because it gave us information for the whole county, and it also broke it down in by economics and ethnic information and religion and all of the things that we needed broken down for us. So I provided you with a link on our whole statistics and everything from the Gale database. And again, that will be, you'll get a handout with all of the talking points, and that will be included in there. So you don't have to worry about copying that down or taking a screenshot or anything. So once we had our statistical information, then we had to worry about how we were going to create this spreadsheet. We did our best to match our spreadsheet categories with our county demographics, because we wanted to do a comprehensive audit, a really good comprehensive audit, instead of just doing a simple one with a few little queries and then having to go back and do it all again later. We thought we'd go big and go strong and just get it all done at once. But that was a little overwhelming because we have such a wide variety of diversity in our county. It sort of made it unwieldy. So we spent a lot of time going over our spreadsheet and tweaking it and taking things out and adding things in and making changes to reduce the number of queries that we had. And it was a really difficult task until Ashley decided that she had the brilliant idea of just doing drop down boxes, and that made it so much easier. So after a little bit more tweaking and such, we decided that was our best bet, and that's what we went with. So it'll make it much easier for you. Um, but we also, let's see, we wanted to, and the reason this was so hard is that we didn't want to quantify our list too much, because even though because it's so diverse, even though there's such a small percentage in some particular groups, there's still high interest. For example, Wicca, there's only 2% of Wyandotte Countyans that are Wiccans, uh, that are declared Wiccans, but our Wiccan witchcraft books in the library, as you know, are greatly popular. So we needed to make sure that we were covering everything. So once we narrowed our focus, once we decided on what we were going to do, we kind of had to define our focus. So we chose to focus on the authors and illustrators. And then we decided to focus on the main characters and then secondary characters if they made a difference to the storyline or the plot. So once we decided that, then our identity markers were for authors, we were going to look at sexual orientation, race and ethnicity, and gender identification. And the same with illustrators. That's what we were looking for with them. For characters, though, we needed to look at age, race and ethnicity, religion, socioeconomics, language, abilities, gender ID, and sexual orientation. Now, each of these characters has a drop down box of choices that we decided to look at. So for gender, we have cisgender, transgender, and non-binary queer, gender queer. Those are the choices that you'll have there. For sexual orientation, we looked at heterosexual, homosexual, bisexual, pansexual, and asexual. And then for race and ethnicity, we broke it down into white American and European American, or European, Middle Eastern, Black, African, and African Americans, Hispanic and Latinx, Native American, Alaska Native, Asian, Asian Americans, Native Hawaiian, Pacific Islander, and then biracial and multiracial. So now that we have all of our pieces in place for our spreadsheet, we're ready to start the audit. So our plan so far is to start analyzing adult fiction in all the branches. We used the mobile libraries as our test group so that we could test out our spreadsheet and make sure that we had all the pieces in place. They're going to go ahead and keep working on the mobile library audit, but they're also going to help with the adult fiction because that's where we're focusing on right now. So all the adult fiction, Ashley is taken all the adult fiction items and she's randomized them to represent a third of the collection. So we're only actually auditing a third of the adult fiction items. And that's what we're going to do for each group that we audit. So your EDI committee representative, your contact person, will work with each branch. Each branch has a person that's going to kind of coordinate with them. And they're the ones who have contacted you about being one of the auditors and working on the audit. We decided we were just going to have each branch do their own audit, and we needed several people at each branch. So I think we settled on 8 at Main and West, and we started out with 5 at South, but I think Sarah did a really good job and got extra people. So they have somewhere between 5 and 8. I think she said 8, but I'm not sure. And then we have at least 2 at Turner, those are the people that are going to be mainly focusing on getting this audit done. And each branch is going to have their very own spreadsheet of randomized adult fiction titles. And Ashley has gone through and pulled out duplicates. So if you have on your spreadsheet a Jodi Picoult book, even though we have 10 copies of that, spread around all the other branches, you're the only branch that is going to audit that book so that we don't have a lot of duplication and we can concentrate on unique titles. Our goal, and this is where you come in, is to have every staff auditor audit 50 titles by February 26th. So we have about 6 weeks to do 50 titles. We thought it'd maybe be a slow start, and we don't want to overwhelm people or cause people stress. So we thought 50 titles would be a good way to start, but we hope to increase that number in March up to 100 per staff. And We're going to keep going that direction. Our hope is to get our collection of diversity audit completed within 6 months. We're hopeful. I'm not quite sure we're going to make it, but I am ever hopeful. We'll see how far we get. So now we're going to talk about your actual audit instructions. This audit, you can do this on off desk time. You don't have to stand in front of the shelf and pull books off or handle each book. You've got your spreadsheet. You can use workflows, kckpl.org, online review materials, um, anything you need to complete this task. You do it your own way in your, following the instructions, but you make it as easy on yourself as possible. In the rare case that with adult fiction, you have to look at a specific title, you're more than welcome to do so. We just don't want you to feel like you have to pull each book off the shelf every time you do this. So I just put a list of review sources up here. I know it's hard to see on the slide, but it'll be in your handouts in that training outline that you're going to get from your contact person. It's a list of resources that I like to use. It is not by any means meant to be the only resources you can use. I do like to start with Kirkus because the last couple of lines of a Kirkus review always tells you um, identity markers of the main character and whatever secondary characters there are. And if they can't tell, they will say presumed white. So I think that's for this instance, this is a really good resource to maybe have in your back pocket or even start with. Goodreads is good because it gives you a lot of times a photo of the author, information about the author, and you get multiple um, reviews and synopsises. So it's a good way to really get an idea of the book. Fantastic fiction gives you author information. It doesn't really give you a synopsis of the book, but it does usually have a photo of the author and it gives you some basic author information. Book List, Publishers Weekly, those are great review sources also. Sometimes they'll have articles about specific authors and they'll have a photo of the author. They'll tell you more about the author's personal life. Um, Hornbook and School Library Journal won't be very helpful for this part of the audit because they cover mostly young adult and children's materials. So just keep those in your back pocket for later. So here we are with our actual spreadsheet, and the spreadsheet's really long, so there's no way I could get all of the spreadsheet on here, so it's going to be in chunks. So your spreadsheet will come and you'll have a barcode, you'll have the title of the book, and then you'll have all the things that you'll need to fill out, starting with the author's sexual orientation, all those markers that we talked about earlier. So using your branch spreadsheet, you'll start by looking up the item barcode over here and look it up. Some people start with workflows. I find that it's easier to skip workflows and just put the barcode into the barcode into kckpl.org, and then the book comes up and you've got a little bit of author information and a quick synopsis of the book so you can get started. You find the way that works best for you, but one way or the other, you're going to want to start with either workflows or kckpl.org, because you'll need to get the author's name and then you'll need to start doing the research on the book. Um, you can also look for more information about the author, illustrator, characters, plot, using some of those supplemental review sources that I just talked about. But we really want to stress to you that you shouldn't spend a huge amount of time researching these books. We are hoping that you keep it to about 10 minutes per title. I think that's a good amount of time to get pretty much all the information you need. If you can't find information, it's okay to put unknown, and each drop down box has an unknown that you can just select there. So um, use your best judgment and find your best workflow. So when you get your book, you've put your author in, and then each box has a drop down menu, and you'll just select from the drop down menu whatever you need to put for that book. And then once you've done the author, you can skip the illustrator. You'll have a bunch of blank spaces and move over to the main character. And you'll do the same thing. We'll use this one over here. You will go to the square, I mean the rectangle, the space, and then just use the drop down menu and select whichever one you need after you've done your research on that title. If it's apparent that the secondary characters add to the diversity of the title, then you can choose one. You can do more if you want, but choose at least one character to add to the spreadsheet. If they don't, if all the characters in the title are are white, they're all everything is the same. You don't need to do a secondary character. But if it changes the story in any way, then do a secondary character. A lot of times there's more than one secondary character, and it's hard to choose. If it's a group, just choose one. You don't have to do a whole bunch of them unless you think it really, really matters to the story, and that's at your discretion. But same thing, you'll fill out the same things that we ask for as the main characters, and you'll just use your drop down boxes and fill that in. Some important tips is remember not to try not to spend more than 10 minutes on each title. If you're not absolutely positive about an answer, select unknown. We'd rather be unknown than to mislabel someone and be wrong. When assessing illustrations, it's important to make sure that the authors included authentic facial features and not just made everyone look the same and shaded the skin color different tones. Those aren't really true authentic illustrations, and so we don't want to put those in a diverse class if they're not really diverse illustrations. You won't have a lot of illustrations with adult fiction, but you may have some. It may be cover art, it may be within the pages. So it's not unknown that you will have to use that illustration information. And then if you have any questions at all, um, confer with your EDI committee contact person, or you can call or email me, and we will get your questions answered, walk you through it, do whatever we have to do to make it easier. And then I talked about all the research that we did, all the ideas that we pulled together. This is a sample of some of the things that we looked through. I just put them here in case you're interested in figuring out what we were thinking, where we were going with this. So peruse those at your leisure if you would like to. And then there will be some handouts. Each one of your contact people will make sure that you get print copies of our EDI statement. Um, they'll give you the link to the PowerPoint. We did record this. And then I have everything on the PowerPoint. I did a training outline, which spells everything out. And so you'll have a copy of that so that you can refer back to it as much as you need to. If you don't get copies or you need additional copies or information, just contact me and I will make sure that you get them. So each of us on the committee, well, several of us, not everyone, is going to show you an example of how we handled um, a book. It might be just a regular title, or it might be something particularly tricky that made us really think about how we were doing this, or whatever the case is. So we're going to take turns. I'm going to start, and then we're going to take turns going through and showing you an example of how we handled our spreadsheet or a particular title on our spreadsheet. So the title that I'm going to talk about is this title right here, A Traveler at the Gates of Wisdom, and it's by John Boyne. And so the first thing I did was look it up in kckpl.org and write the author in. It told me a little bit about the book, but it seems like a really complicated book, and it didn't give me much author information. So I used some of those other resources that I talked about. First place I went was Goodreads, and I was hoping to find a picture of the author to get an idea, because this is an author I'd never heard of. But they didn't have a picture, but they did have a lot of good information about the book. So I already knew that it sounded like a really long, huge book, and that it took place in several different times with several different people, but it kind of spelled it out a little bit more, gave me a little bit more to think about. So this is just more information that I found Goodreads that helped. And I didn't read every single article, but I did kind of skip around and read as much as I could. But I still need to find some information about the author. So I first went to Wikipedia just to see if I could get some ideas on where to look. And then I also checked some author pages. Wikipedia helped me out. They had a picture of the author. I found out he was Irish, he's white, he's gay, he's an advocate of gay literature, so he writes a lot about gay and growing up gay Catholic and in Ireland. So I had a lot of good information that I could use for my spreadsheet. So I went back to my spreadsheet and I started using the drop boxes and filling things in. So there's the information on the author. And then when it got to the characters, this was a little bit tricky because this book is about a family and it begins in 1 AD. It starts out that it's about a volatile father of 2 boys. It's narrated by one of the boys. So, but then it time jumps. Each section of the book takes place in a different time, and it's about different offspring or family members. So there were lots of different snippets of main characters. I chose the father since he was the first one, and the first part of the book was about him. So the father clearly identified as male, even though he's married. There were other sexual proclivities that were alluded to as the cause of his temper, but they weren't specifically spelled out. So in that case, I put unknown for his sexual orientation because I wasn't positive. We've sort of changed this. We no longer have new adult, we just have adult. So we made this a little bit easier. And then since he's Roman, I put him down as white European. What I couldn't really tell what his religion was, so I made a mistake here. It should be unknown. I don't know. I think I just copy and pasted wrong. And then he starts off as a jailer, and but he's upset that he hasn't risen higher in life by now. So I chose working class for him. And then it's narrated in English because it's written for us, but I'm assuming if they're Roman, they would have spoken Italian. But since I wasn't sure, I put unknown. And then this book did have secondary characters that did change the makeup of the title, it had so many that it was hard to figure out which ones to use. I chose the narrator, the first son, as a secondary character because he's narrating throughout the book. But I could have chose any of those. There was a ton of secondary characters I could have chose. I just happened to pick him. So for him, he's an adult. He's a younger adult, but he's an adult, and he's Roman, white European. Still don't know the religion. He's done better in his life than his father. He's risen up in his station. So I did change that to middle class. And then I stuck with the same unknown language. And as far as abilities, and what we mean by abilities are, instead of using disabilities, we decided to use abilities. So cognitive, neuro, physical abilities. He didn't seem to have anything out of the norm. So I put unknown. You could also say that the violence that his father carried, he struggled with also. So that could have been a cognitive ability, but he didn't have it for the whole time. So I just put unknown for that. So that was one of the hardest books that I had to work through. And it took a little bit of time, but that is how I handled that one. So I'm going to close my screenshot, perhaps. Bear with me. Okay, I have you all back. And we're going to start taking turns going through other books. I was checking the chat to see if there were any questions, and I don't see any questions. But before I throw it to someone else, does anyone have any questions they want to ask so far? Nope. All right. So we're going to go ahead and start with Sarah. Are you ready to go ahead with your book?
Sure.
Okay.
All right. I'm not the best at this sharing screen. Let's see. Okay, hopefully everyone can see my spreadsheet right here for a moment. So the book that I'm going to show you all is Book of the Little Axe. And so I just take the item ID and I plugged it into workflows and got the author, who is Lauren Francis Sherman. And then I like to just go straight to Goodreads and plug in the book, which is what I did here. So I find Goodreads to be kind of the source that I would usually use. It gives a good synopsis here. And then, let me see, hopefully everybody can see that Goodreads screen. And you can also see the genres where sometimes you can get information about what might be something you would be plugging into your spreadsheet. And then I would go straight to the author. So in this case, I would just kind of open up and get a picture of the author. So this Goodreads does have a picture. The chairs did decide that we can look at a picture and try to judge some of the things. So I did put Lauren Francis as female and then Black or African American, but by the little synopsis here, I wasn't sure in terms of sexual orientation. So I went to her page, and a lot of times an author's page, you can go to like a meet the author or an about the author. And so it goes on to tell me that Lauren is a child of Trinidadian immigrants. So I was more confident then in the author's race and ethnicity. And it went on to say that she lives with her husband and 2 children. So I did put her then as heterosexual. I will say that for some of the authors, if I didn't find anything, I would just put their name and Google their name with like wife or husband to see if I could find anything about them. And if I couldn't, then I would put unknown since it's hard to tell. So then I would go back in for my characters and I would read this one. So it goes on to tell me all about the book, and it tells me that there is a young lady named Rosa. She's in Trinidad at a time when the homeland is changing from Spanish to British rule. And that Rosa's family comes from a family of free Black property owners. So, with that information, I was able to decide that Rosa was an adult. She was Black or African American. So, I was able to assign her that. The pronouns being used were always she, so I could put then her as female. I couldn't tell from that though. It seemed like she was upper class, but when you keep reading, it talks about how Rosa is then living among the Crow Nation in Bighorn, Montana. And so I wasn't sure for socioeconomic class for the majority of the book. So I put that one as unknown, along with language as unknown, since I didn't know if she spoke Spanish or if she spoke English because of the British rule, or if she went to live with this tribe and spoke a different language. So that one I put as unknown. And then as I read further into it, I saw there are other characters alluded to. So her husband is a Crow chief, but her son Victor is the one that I ended up deciding to put as my secondary character because it says that he is going with Rosa to discover secrets about her. So I decided he was kind of the main secondary character. And so, since he is a young man looking for his vision and about to become a man, I put him as a young adult or teenager and then as male. And this one I struggled with a little bit because I saw that it was marked as Native American. And I do know that his dad is Native American, but I also know that Rosa was from Trinidad. So I originally put this one as Native American, but then went back and switched Victor over to biracial. And then all of the other categories, even when I went through and read some of the reviews, I couldn't find any more information in terms of sexual orientation and language. So I put all of those as unknown. And this is just kind of how I would usually start all of my audits for the books, is I would get that author and then go to Goodreads and find the information that I could and use Google searches if I didn't. And then that's how I would go through them.
Thank you, Sarah. We did have one question in the chat box, and it was from Hannah. I think it was from Hannah. If the author's married, if to someone of the opposite sex, do we list them as heterosexual or unknown, since they could be bisexual? And you're right, they could be, but unless it specifically says that they are, we defaulted to heterosexual if they were married, unless you find other information. And that's one of those things where you just have to use your best judgment.
And I do know that when we talked about it, is that when we look at the authors, we do kind of make a little bit more assumptions than we do with characters. So even if you sometimes have a cover art that, you know, is a romance with 2 white characters, unless it's explicitly stated. I know, Kim, I think you'd said we wouldn't automatically assume the characters.
That is absolutely correct.
Yes. As that race.
Yes. Okay, Krista, are you ready to share yours?
Yeah, and mine's actually a good one to jump off of that because it. So let me see if I can screen share. Okay, can you all see mine?
It's starting. Yeah, now we can.
Okay. So the one I chose wasn't so much difficult, but it was just one where I really got a lot of information, and it was a more diverse title. I went with Red, White, and Royal Blue by Casey McQuiston. And I did the same. I go to Goodreads is a really good one because it does have author information and categories. And I've also been using, let's see, bring this up. So I went to this one, but I also have been using Novelist because it also has a lot of the information that's going to, already it has LGBTQIA. So I knew that that would be something to talk about amongst the author or the characters. So when I went in and actually researched the author, her picture, the way I kind of went about it was also like when reading about someone being married, having children, I don't know what goes on behind closed doors, but the way they're presenting themselves is that they are heterosexual. So that's kind of where I would go with it. And if I were to see, yes, someone who was married to a man, I would say that they're presenting themselves as homosexual because, yeah, you don't know if someone's bisexual or pansexual. But this was a really good book because the author herself, I just typed in to look for her website, but there were numerous articles talking about how she is bisexual herself. So I went ahead and was able to put that in. Obviously, she's white or European, but she is also presenting herself again as a cis female. With the characters, the story is a romance between two boys, and one of them, so it's set obviously in another time because it's the first female president. And it's her son, and he is exploring his sexuality. So I've kind of found that after reading a couple of other reviews. So I put him as bisexual, but it's about his romance with another young man, but his last name is hyphenated and it's Diaz, and it was said that he is also biracial. So I went ahead and was able to put him as biracial. Because his mom's the president, I just put upper class because, he's not going to be with the rest of us. But his counterpart that he falls in love with is also identifies as a cis male, but I didn't have any information that said he was questioning his sexuality at all. So I went ahead and put him as homosexual, white or European, because I believe he's a Welsh prince. And again, upper class. I know that the author herself has ADHD, so she is neurodiverse, but nothing I read in terms of the characters said anything about them being neurodiverse. So when it came to ability, I just put unknown because nothing was mentioned about that. And going back to, I also really like fantastic fiction, usually because there is a picture of the author. But again, it's also, you're going to get some of the same information when you're using Goodreads. But I really did enjoy Novelist to really help me just because of all the topics there. And then another thing was on Goodreads, it also mentioned that it was an Alex Award. So I think looking at the awards is also really helpful because I think especially as we move into the juvenile literature and then YA, you're going to see a lot of like, if you see Stonewall Award, you're automatically going to know there's queer characters, things like that. So when I saw the Alex Award, that kind of helped me realize it's going to be about new adults. And I feel like usually when it's that adult fiction that blends with YA, you're going to have a lot more of those kind of topics that are more diverse. So that was mine.
No, it is not.
Okay, good. So then the one we were talking about, it must have.
Sorry, I was muted. Thank you, Krista. You did an excellent job. Does anybody have any questions for her
Oh, okay, great.
before we move on?
Yeah, sounds like a plan.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Talk to you later.
I'm gonna mute
Bye-bye.
Jackie. Jacqueline, I muted you. If you need to say anything, just raise your hand and I'll unmute you. I don't want you to miss out on
I'm
talking.
so sorry. I did not know that was unmuted. I answered the phone and Andy was on, so I apologize. I don't know why I unmuted.
It's quite all right. No problem at all. We've got one more that we're going to go through, and that is Elena. She has a book that she's going to talk about. And then we'll take last questions and we'll wrap up. So Elena, are you ready?
Yep.
All right. Thank you.
Hello. My book that I chose is Afterlife, novel by Julia Alvarez. And I made the screenshots of all of my spreadsheet and put them on the same page for you to see. So I first went to the catalog and I went first to workflows and pasted the barcode there. That's how I got the author's name. And I also read the review that was given in description and subjects. So it gave me a little bit of information about the book and the author. To find out more about the author, I went to the author's website, and from there I concluded that Julia Alvarez was married with children, I believe, so it made her heterosexual. Her race and ethnicity was Hispanic or Latinx, and she identified herself as female. For adult fiction, we really do not need to know much about the illustrator or their ethnicity or gender. It wasn't really relevant, so I put it as unknown. For main characters' gender, I concluded that she was a female, and I found that out from Goodreads. And I also, while I was on author's website, I used I just looked at the book itself on author's website. It gives some information. To learn more about characters, I went to Goodreads, and I also like to use Amazon because it gives you opportunity to look through some of the pages. I can get the feel for the book this way, and I can read a little bit, especially first several pages. It usually gives you the exposition to the book. You can see who is the main character, and usually the author gives you right away what the character looks like, and a little bit about her family or relationships and stuff like that. In the second part, I went to the main character's place and figured that she was heterosexual because he was uh, married. She just buried her husband. Uh, she was retired at age 55, 70, and she was from Dominican Republic. Uh, I believe it was mentioned that she was Catholic in the book. She was a retired professor, and I put it as upper middle class. Her main language was English because she was an English professor, retired English professor. Uh, Nothing is said about her abilities or disabilities, so I kept it as unknown. For secondary character, I chose the teenagers that appeared on the main character's doorstep, and she was a young teenager that was pregnant, so that gave me ability to say that she was heterosexual, that she was a teenager, and she was also homeless, as we know over here. So she was also from Mexico, I believe, and she was Hispanic or Latin. Her language was Spanish because it was noted that she didn't speak English. And about her abilities, again, I didn't see anything, so I put it as unknown. And so this was it for my book. Uh, okay, so
Thank you. Anybody have any questions for Elena? I did see the question in the chat from Hannah, um, and I'll answer that as soon as I find out if anybody else has any other questions.
there was also a question from Ethan.
Oh, thanks. Okay,
I
so we'll go ahead.
Oh, I saw Ethan's questions about nationalities and native languages. And when we were doing this, I had 100 Years of Solitude, which is a book originally written in Spanish, but of course, the book that popped up for us was in English. And we as a committee decided that for our characters, we would put the language that the book was originally written in. So hopefully that will help reflect some of that diversity in the audit. I think that kind of is where you're going at. But so the only time we would kind of mention the language is if that book was originally written in that language.
Thank
You can correct me if I'm wrong, Kim.
Nope, you are exactly right. Because we do have a fair amount of things that are translated, and there are awards for translated books. So we will focus on the characters and not so much because there isn't always information about the authors that covers, they may be a different nationality, but it might not mention what language they're native to, or what language they speak. So like Sarah said, we decided to concentrate on the characters. Hannah's question was, how do you determine the differences between upper, middle, and upper class? We kind of struggled with this. We decided we had a more broad, so we had broader selections, but we kind of narrowed it down. I think we narrowed it down to working class, just straight middle class, and upper class. And this is another time where you there isn't a cutoff amount that a character needs to have or live in. Just use your best judgment. If it's middle or upper middle class, it's just middle class. If they're super rich, and you can tell that, it's upper class. This is one of those judgment calls. So that's a good question. Thank you. Both of those were really good questions. So thank you both for that. I did forget about Linda. Linda, do you have a book that you want to share?
I don't, but thank you.
No problem. I just didn't want to leave you out if you did. And I think Aaron's going back and forth between the desks. So I don't think that he is going to want to share because he may have to run out. He might not even be in here now. So actually we're pretty much done. Unless we need to go over more questions or clear something up. This is recorded, so you will have a recording to refer back to and all those other notes that I talked about. We want to thank you all for stepping up and helping us with this. It's a huge project and we realize that, but it's going to make our library better for our patrons, better for our staff. So we really appreciate your hard work on this. We really, really do. And I got to say, I had the best committee ever. They kept us on task. They were thoughtful. They worked hard. They did tons of research, and they put a lot of thought and effort into this. And so I really, really have to thank them. They did great. So that's it. I think we're all done. Thank you, everyone. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks.